Welcome. This is Lift, the podcast, where we interview luminaries of our time to uplift, inspire, and mobilize us in interesting times. I'm your host. My name is Katya Slavinskaya. Today, I'll be interviewing the artist Kyra Coates, who completely impressed and inspired me when she used a diagnosis that she received at 39 years old, a diagnosis of cognitive decline leading to Alzheimer's disease. She decided that what she would do with it is create a series of paintings strung together by a story based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Now, Kyra has a long history of spiritual practice, and some of it was in the Buddhist tradition. And so she's taking the Tibetan Book of the Dead and rewriting it to make it accessible to Westerners and give us a different approach, a different possibility for approaching death and the dying process. So I'm completely blown away by the courage that I imagine it would take to take a diagnosis that most of us would never want to hear and turn it into something that will nourish and educate our society, frankly, in an area that is taboo and not talked about enough. And when it is talked about, it seems like we have a very narrow set of possibilities from which we view death and dying. So before we get into the interview, let me read Kyra's official bio, and then we'll get to our conversation. Kyra has been an artist since she was 18 months old, no exaggeration. She studied at the Corcoran School of Art and the Maryland Institute College of Art. She became a full-time professional artist at the age of 21. At that time, she had a profound spiritual experience. She left everything behind and became a nun in a Hindu tradition and lived that way for 3 years, doing deep spiritual practice and humanitarian work. At age 26, she realized the life of renunciation wasn't in alignment with her deepest spiritual experiences and left that world behind. She went on to study at Naropa University, which is a small Buddhist-inspired university in Boulder, Colorado, that was founded by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. This is also my alma mater. It was there she dove deep into the Buddhist teachings, focusing on understanding the psychology of enlightenment. While studying there, she worked as a caregiver in hospice and with the elderly. She helped many people die along the way and learned much about human psychology in death. These experiences have deeply informed this project, and she'll talk more about that in the interview. Kyra returned professionally in 2014 to the art world with a focus on spiritual and psychological expressions of women's empowerment. She founded Infuse Gallery. This art gallery partnered with several women-focused nonprofits and gave those served in the gallery a platform to sell their art. Recently, after receiving a diagnosis of cognitive decline leading to Alzheimer's disease at 39, she decided to blend her spiritual lessons with her artistic expression and is creating a painting series and story based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead that will be turned into a book at the end of 2020. So without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Kyra Coates. Hello, everyone, and welcome Kyra Coates to Lift, the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's so good to have you. It's an honor. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. My absolute pleasure.
Kyra, I am so inspired and moved by your story. In your own words, will you tell us what brought you here and about this very special turning point in your life?
Absolutely. So just to kind of give you a small background about me, I'm a mother of 4 kids and a blended family, 2 that I birthed, 2 that I've been gifted with, and 39 years old, and an artist. And I also do part-time work in women's empowerment nonprofits. And just recently, after a couple years of pretty mysterious health problems, ranging from various things, which I'm happy to dive into later, I was diagnosed with early cognitive decline leading to Alzheimer's disease. It's a pretty shocking diagnosis to get at 39 years old. And there's an irony too, because I actually for years worked as a personal care provider in hospice and in individuals' homes, very specifically with people that had Alzheimer's and dementia. So I've got quite a lot of experience with this. So after digesting this for a little bit and being in shock and going through some stages of grief, I have actually decided to take this diagnosis and take some 20 years of spiritual training and exploration that I've done and do what I know how to do best, which is turn it into art and story. And so I'm creating a project that is based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And this project is going to feature myself and my 4 daughters, and we'll basically be telling the story of death and the lessons of how we can approach it in a way that is not based in tragedy, has room for sadness, but also recognizes it as an opportunity to wake up to what is our true nature of mind. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, they call it Buddha nature, our own Buddha nature, which is basically our own enlightened self, our uninhibited awareness that is accessible at any time, and death is just one avenue that allows us to explore it. So I'm just creating this journey, hoping I can pass it on to my own children and hoping that it can become a tool for other people. Doing a series of about 20 paintings with the accompanying story, and it's going to be printed into a book, both softcover and hardcover, by the end of 2020.
Mm. And this is something that you have a crowdfunding campaign?
Yes, I do. Right now, we're currently running an Indiegogo campaign. It ends on Thanksgiving, which I'm hoping will be a very grateful day, and we'll reach all of our goals. We're about 72% there. And the campaign is to help fund the printing of the book, buying the ISBN numbers, the art supplies, a bit for my time, and and marketing. And the grand vision is that I hope to take these paintings and the book as an exhibition that can be used in hospitals or spiritual centers, hospice centers, whoever is a willing audience to hear this message. Yeah. So that's the grand vision. And so the crowdfunding campaign is to help bring all of this into manifestation, into reality.
Mm. Yes. So I've been sharing this crowdfunding campaign just like mad because I find it to be such an inspiring story and such an incredible cause. So yes, I will continue to. So Kyra, looking back on your entire life, would you say that are you able to see threads leading up to what's happening now that maybe were incubating or were unclear as to where they would lead at the time, and now it's more of an obvious connection?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's many threads and multiple avenues that I could explore with that. I can say that to speak to what would be more of, I guess, perceived as the negative side, the actual diagnosis that I received itself. Yeah. Right. Yeah. We could call it positive, negative. It is what it is. That began, and it's an interesting conversation that has sort of lit this fire in me about what it is. So why I, at 39 years old, am so susceptible to something like Alzheimer's disease is actually a genetic factor. And I have these two genes that are called the ApoE4 genes. Everybody has ApoE genes in their body. You either have ApoE2, E3, or E4. The majority of the population, if they don't have these ApoE4 genes, you're at about a 9% risk of Alzheimer's disease. If you have one of an ApoE4 gene, it puts you at about a 35% risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. If you have two of them, it puts you way above 50% to almost 90% chance of contracting it. Mm-hmm. I have two of them, and the reason why is it creates a very specific inflammatory response in the body, and that was how these health issues began to show up. Now, that aside, it's been a larger conversation about what triggered these genes into activity. And as a mom, and I was a single mom at some point in time, trying to pursue a career, trying to, be financially successful, trying to be super mommy, all of this, what it has really pointed to is this story that I think many of us in this culture live out of self-sacrifice to the point of almost disappearing. And I know many moms, especially in the beginning, the first 1 or 2 years after they have a kid, they wake up one day and they're like, where have I gone? Like I've disappeared into mommy land. What's happened to me? Yes. And for me, it was years and years of no sleep, absolutely no sleep, and, working like a dog, trying to support the family and buying into this story that I could do and have it all. This is the cultural story many of us have told. And only recently have I really said to myself, that's kind of a crock. I don't, like I don't want to have it all. I want to have a break, and I see this diagnosis as basically being a culmination of that. So for me, it's a point of the universe saying, and now, it took this point for you to take the permission to do what you love, take care of yourself, set clear boundaries, and not buy into this hyper stressed culture. Because really what triggered it for me in the past few years has been intense stress. A lot of stress and time in front of the computer and on our screens and answering and always connected and blah, 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 just that level of crazy. And so for me, it's been a blessing in that sense where I have a really, really good excuse to say no. So I'm grateful for that. And I'm hoping that other people can also take permission to do that without having to reach some level of an extreme health issue.
Yes.
So, yeah, we all should have that permission.
Amen to that. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I know that was just one part of the answer. And before we go to part 2, I'm curious, as this diagnosis, this new excuse to take care of yourself, right? It's kind of laughable to use it that way, to call it that. But as it has come into your life and kind of sieved out the things that are not really truly worthy of your time, or maybe, not as important as they once felt, what has remained? What has remained as truly meaningful?
For me, it's really, it's sieved out, most importantly, I would say, a lot of mental states that I held. This constant sense of busyness, I think, is really, and it's still a work in progress. I still catch myself going into this hyper busy mode, which everybody lives right now. It's outrageous. Trying to get together with friends, we have to schedule 2 months in advance because we're busy, we're doing. So the doingness is really what has had to kind of go that way. And in work, I work part-time with a really wonderful women's empowerment organization. And there's this pressure for just constant deadlines, like we need this yesterday kind of thing. And I'm just not really buying into that anymore, And in my own life, there's these constant, reminders with emails popping up, or, you know, with kids, the busyness, or need to clean the house and need to do all of that. And just to be able to take a step back and say, we're going to live if it doesn't happen right in this moment, you
Yes.
know?
Yes.
And it's been extremely rewarding and also shocking to, when I take this stance, to see the response that I get from other people, you know, that most people desperately would like to do the same thing.
Yes.
And so there's,
Yes.
there's really been this tremendous, like, oh, I understand it all, you know, that
Yes.
feels, oh, you're so lucky, and oh, and almost as if it gives them permission too.
Yes.
There's this shock and recognition that most of us just get into this mode, and it's an unconscious way of being that we've been conditioned to have in our society. So I think that's really it. And in terms of just how that shows up in my everyday life, you know, more time with my children, less time worrying about that. I've cut back on time in front of the computer, time on my phone, you know, in particular. Those are very important, you know, time just being and talking and breathing and exercising and, you know, really, really doing all of that. And my art and my creativity. There's this experience I have where when I really feel my brain scrambled is when I'm linearly focused on something that's very like a type A sort of analytic kind of approach. When I'm open and I'm creative, like with my art and storytelling and writing, it feels like a complete brain experience. It's very in the now. It's very lacking a goal, and is more about the experience of expression. So it feels as if there's this sort of sense of purity and freedom coming through. And in those moments, there's nothing wrong, and everything is very balanced. And I don't feel like I have a disease or an ailment.
Yes.
So it's a beautiful experience, and I'm owning more of that.
I'm so moved because on the one hand, well, I'll say, you know, one is that it really sounds like this turning point, this diagnosis, which obviously nobody would wish for
No.
outright,
Right.
has actually really given you your life back in a way.
Yeah, I would say that. I think, and even my doctor
Oh, you froze. Let's,
said,
oh,
Eric,
there you are.
yeah, there you go. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes. Would you just repeat that,
Oh,
please?
I said, you know, I even, the day that I received this diagnosis, my doctor who diagnosed it, who's a fabulous naturopath, who's based out of Boulder, Colorado. I want to give a big shout out to Eric Dorniger, Dr. Eric Dorniger of Roots and Branches. So he's the one that gave me this diagnosis. He even clearly said that if we hadn't been diving in the way we had, he's like, it's very easy. You could have still been making excuses years down the road. And I think that really resonated with me, because I think that we do that. Everybody does that. We make excuses.
Yes.
You know, we make excuses for why we have to be a certain way, why we have to perform a certain way.
Sorry. Stop it.
So, and yeah, this diagnosis is still very frightening for me, as much as I've turned it into a positive thing.
Yes.
But at the same time, I have this sense of hopefulness because I'm young, and we've caught it early, and there is a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle choice in many ways, and so I'm choosing life and vibrancy and joy and, you know, self-care, and, you know, I want to show up as a better mother. I want to show up as a better person, you know, in the world. I want to show up as a better lover to my partner. And you know, it's unfortunate that many of us, in one capacity or another, we have to have those hard life lessons smacking us upside the head to get there, but better late than never. So.
Yes. And I also, what I was also reflecting on as you were talking, and that was so clear, was that it seems like what you're experiencing is really a microcosm and such a potent and clear microcosm of what is going on a larger scale in our, in our society, which is speeding up to unsustainable levels.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt.
Without
In
a doubt.
so many capacities where our lifestyles are unsustainable. Absolutely.
And so many of us are feeling that we actually we don't have the option to step off of the hamster wheel.
Yeah, it's very difficult, I think, because we've created a society that is, in essence, a system of slavery.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I just, it's so beautiful because as you talk to us, I think you're like a step ahead.
Oh, thank you.
Right? Of those of us who are still trying our best to stay on the hamster wheel. And, and we may not know actually how to take that first step off.
Right.
From all of the uncertainty and the fear.
Right.
There. Okay. So, the other piece of that question, right?
Yes.
Seeing threads leading up, I'm curious, as an artist, as a, just living your life, also as someone who has been on a spiritual path very actively, can you go back and detect threads that were leading up to the mission that you are living now of teaching about death and teaching this new lens of looking at impermanence?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think both of those threads I have to answer simultaneously because they're so deeply intertwined in terms of the art and the spirituality. My art journey, I've been an artist since before I could even walk. It's just been such an integral part of who I am. I was doing realism drawings at 18 months old. And so, so it's been a journey, and much of like when there's a piece of ourselves that we identify as ourselves, it has its own life. So the artist part of me has had its own journey and own growth. And as always, there's been years of frustration and struggle. I was a professional artist full-time starting when I was 20 years old, and I sold my work full-time for 3.5 years, and actually kind of left the art world in a huff because I was really frustrated with the commercial side of having to paint something to sell, to pay my bills. And more often than not, it was like pretty flowers, or somebody wanted something that matched their couch, that kind of thing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that within itself serves a beautiful functional purpose, and it's, art for its sake within it. But that wasn't my path. And so I had felt this deeper call of service to the world. And I remember I had been down in Florida doing an art show, several art shows. These are like juried exhibitions, weekend art festivals. I was making my living doing a lot of those. And I took a trip to Disney World. And for years as a child, I'd wanted to be an animator because I was so moved by the emotion I felt through the stories of these movies that I saw. And then I went to art school, and I became more serious as an artist and moved into painting. And I went to Disney World, and I remember I went through the animator's studio, and they did this tour. And this was right around the time they were making the movie Brother Bear. And Brother Bear is a story of this young man who's very disconnected from the natural world and arrogant. He goes and tries to hunt a bear and ends up killing one, and then magically is transformed into a bear and has to take care of the cub of the bear that he killed, if anybody remembers that story. So beautiful spiritual story, very beautiful lesson in compassion and empathy. And I remember them talking about this movie, and I burst into tears in the middle of the tour and had to kind of excuse myself and say, I'm selling furniture pieces, and they're doing more meaningful work than me. And that was really the turning point. And right around that time, within a couple months of that happening, I had a very profound spiritual experience, which in the Eastern traditions, they would call it a Kundalini awakening. And it happened, and they're pretty instantaneous like this. And it's this drastic sort of, the Kundalini is an energy that exists in everyone, and it sits at the base of your spine. And it basically, it's a very spiritual force. And for people that if you have any spiritual experience, Kundalini is typically involved to some degree or another. This one was a drastic, like, explosion moving through my whole body. I could read thoughts for a while and see auras, and it was very woo. Extremely ungrounded. You know, I couldn't even sleep inside my house for a couple of weeks because I could just feel everything. I couldn't stand feeling walls. I had to feel life and stuff like that. And right after that happens, I said, I can't dive into this commercial art world anymore. And I left, and within a few months, I met a spiritual teacher who was more in the Hindu tradition. And she actually offered me a very clear explanation and means to work with this energy. So I left my entire life behind, and I traveled with her all over, and I became a nun in a Hindu tradition, and lived that way for about 3.5 years. Mm-hmm. And as I dove deeper, and this was what I consider a very religious part of my life, and I say religious in the sense of the differentiation, I think, between religion and spirituality is religion is a lot of the ritual. It's a lot of the cultural expression of what could be a spiritual philosophy. So, you know, I kind of joke about it now, a lot of the Ramalama Ding Dong, you know, the chants and the mantras, and I wore all white, and I had a shaved head, and I had a special name, and, you know, and I got up and meditated 1,000 hours a day, and, you know, did all of that. That was the ritual, and it was very important at that time for me in my spiritual journey to, I guess the best sense is declutter the mind. I think that's what ritual is very good for. It gives us a point of focus. In terms of actually waking up to what would be considered enlightenment, I don't think we need it. But I think at certain points, it's a useful tool in that sense. So that was what I was living in that time. And then that philosophy shifted for me, and I left and dove more into Buddhism at that point. And what I appreciate about Buddhism, and Tibetan Buddhism in particular, is their philosophy is with the religious stuff, you can take it or leave it, you know, it serves its purpose again, or you don't even need it if you just focus on the practice. But they understand human psychology very powerfully. And I think that speaks to a lot of people here in the West, where psychology within itself has almost become a type of religion for us here. And that's because we're a very scientifically based culture. We like things that are quantifiable in many ways, and, you know, peer-reviewed studies, and, you know, all of that serves a very, very good purpose. And psychology has been a path for that. Buddhism kind of came into psychology from a different route. It's not as scientific. It was more of the inner exploration. So as the Western world has, you know, done studies and, you know, other people and put it out there and quantified it and all of it, Buddhism is like, well, we're going to deep dive in and come back and let you know what we find out. So
we have this means to explore within ourselves.
Exactly.
Too. Yes.
Exactly. And so there's very much a strong sense of personal responsibility. So at this time in my life, and I'm weaving it all back, at this time in my life, I went to study at Naropa University, where I actually met you. And yay.
All water. Yes.
Yes. And while I was at Naropa, and this began before I actually became a nun and I came back to it, I began working as a personal care provider for people, the elderly. And over time, due to training that I received in nonviolent communication, and at Naropa, I was simultaneously studying religious studies and psychology. My focus, and yoga also, my main focus there was to understand the psychology of enlightenment. How much this applied to working with people as they were dying was phenomenal to me. And and Buddhism itself, they focus on death, not in a macabre sense of the word, but in the sense of this is impermanent. You know, everything that we're experiencing is impermanent. You could die tomorrow. And, you know, and so recognizing that, what's the state of mind that you're in within that? So because I was able to apply that, more and more of my clients that started coming to me had dementia. They had Alzheimer's, because this is the way that diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's work. So Alzheimer's in particular affects a very specific part of the brain, which is called the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is our memory center. Now, here's some interesting things that when I first started learning about it kind of blew my noodle a little bit. We are a compilation of stories. Everybody is. Our personalities become this compilation of stories as we grow and change throughout life. Yes, some of it is kind of passed on genetically. There is that aspect, but the majority of our stories are lived experiences, memories, unconscious or conscious, that we hang on to, which create neural pathways in the brain. Now, neuroplasticity exists early in life, and it begins to harden the older that we get. So these pathways, the ones that are used the most are the ones that become the strongest, right? So much of our personality is because we have strong neural pathways that are firing off, telling us these messages of how to act, how to be, what to think, what to do, all of it. You get a disease like Alzheimer's and dementia, and the first thing that starts to go is the hippocampus. So our memory center. So as I would work with people and their personalities would begin to disappear because their stories were disappearing. So that is why people, if you talk to people who've ever worked with family members that have this disease, they say, well, they disappeared years ago before they died. And that's because that congruent stream of thoughts and memories have broken up.
Yes.
And for the most part, people that have Alzheimer's or dementia are living in either in the now, in the moment of just what is happening, or they're still working with those neural pathways that were the strongest formed, which can either be very joyful, wonderful experiences or trauma. So a lot of people that I worked with Alzheimer's were constantly living trauma over and over, which is very painful to experience. Yeah, especially for the family members, just watching this happen over and over again. As a friend recently shared with me, when his grandfather died of Alzheimer's disease, he was living his PTSD from the Vietnam War over and over again.
Oh,
really difficult. Now, I have a lovely story of one of the first Alzheimer's, not the first, but in the beginning of when I was really working with clients with Alzheimer's, there was this woman named Inez, and I went in, she was in hospice at this point in time, moments away from dying by the time I had my first and only visit with her. And my job was to be in there overnight to take care of her because she was right near the end. And I remember I walked into her hospital room and she was kicking and fighting. And I'd been warned that she was very combative because she was just in trauma all the time. She didn't know what was going on. Her brain had degraded that much that there was no linear thought happening there. So her now experience was confusion and then the pain of past trauma being lived. And she was kicking and screaming and fighting these nurses who were trying to change her IV, to give her fluids. Yes. And, and she had swung punches at many people at that point in time. And I came over to her and using this nonviolent communication, which is a very powerful method of basically mirroring back somebody's felt experience to them in words. So like Inez was just angry and get off me, and I came up to her and I touched her hand and I said, Inez, you're angry. You're frustrated. You want them to leave you alone. And because words were being given to her experience, she calmed down right in that moment.
Wow.
And she said, yes, I don't understand. I want them to leave me alone. And she calmed down enough. They were able to do what they were doing. And I was able to sit with her. And after a short while, she turned to me and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I love you. We'd never met before. This was the first time within an hour of meeting her. And I love you. And, I've been a terrible mother and I'm so sorry. And I hope you can forgive me. She thought I was her daughter.
Yes.
She had a daughter and a son, and she was estranged from her daughter. Wow. They hadn't spoken in many years, for a fight. So she was living that trauma again with me. Mm-hmm. And I met her in that moment. And I said, I love you too. And it's okay. And everything is fine. And all is forgiven. Mm-hmm. You're safe. And I'm here now. And it undercut her trauma story. And what she was able to do was just completely relax in the moment. And there was no more struggle anymore. And all she kept saying for the rest of the night, I love you. And she had a big smile, like, I love you. And she died the next day with her son by her side. I had left at that point in time. But I remember reflecting on that and going, it's really interesting, because what was there? If Inez was gone, the Inez, the personality was gone, and all she was living in those experiences, what was there? What was left? And when we undercut the pain and the scariness of what was happening in her now moment, and when we undercut the trauma experience and it was peace, all that was there was love. That's all that was left. And she was peaceful, and she was just resting in that peace. And that was a very powerful experience for me. So I think about that a lot now. That's one of those threads that has led me back to this point. So when I received this diagnosis of Alzheimer's, that is the direction I'm heading in. And hopefully not, hopefully we don't know what'll happen, and I'm doing everything I can with my doctors. But my first experience was, I'm going to disappear. It's this frightening feeling of, I'm going to disappear. And I had to kind of call in all the past stories, of the people that I had worked with, where I was like, but what disappears? What is it that's going to disappear? And I'm grateful. I'm really grateful that I've been able to work with people over the years and be with them in those moments. And some clients that I had who had dementia and Alzheimer's were wonderful. They were having a great time. They were living in the now, like all the stresses and everything else. There was a freedom in that too. And that's because they weren't hardwired for trauma. Yes. They weren't hardwired to relive those difficult experiences. Yes. So that's what I'm hanging on to. And that is the perspective of what is going to go with me? What are the neural pathways? What is that's the strongest there? And underneath all of that, what is that? And that's the true nature of mind. Yeah. So this I can rest in. What has been difficult for me is how to work with my family. My youngest daughter is 5 years old. They range from 5 to 12. And I'm hoping that by the time the progression of this gets quite bad, they'll be adults and it'll be a different conversation. But I don't know. I don't know. There's days I feel fantastic, and there's other days that are really frightening to me, and I can't find words, and I have pain in my body. And so I don't know. So I said, well, what's the best way that I can work with this? And that was where this idea of this project came. And so it was important for me to create a story that I could tell to my children that they could relate to. What better way to do it than have them be the story and have me be the story? So. Yes.
And how much do they know about this project that's happening right now?
It's interesting. And they know. So as you can see here, I've got the first painting in the series going, and it's not done. Let me move this other painting out of the way, and you can see my 4 girls there. Hold on, I got to put this one down. So the youngest is Josie, Isla, who's 7, Celeste, who's 9, and Maya.
Please, Celeste, a little more.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. There we go.
Yeah. And then none of them have hair yet, and they're all horrified. They're like, when are we going to get hair? It's a work in progress. So what they know is that they know about my diagnosis.
Okay.
My 2 girls, which are Josie and Celeste, I took them out hiking one day, and I said, well, this is a great opportunity, because one way to work with this is exercise is extremely important. I have to exercise every day. Yeah. And there's really, I got maybe one day off, but it's really important. So I said, well, and they knew I've been having health issues. And I said, I want you to know that mommy found out that I may get Alzheimer's disease, and what I've been experiencing has kind of been the beginning of that happening. I'm like, but we can kind of keep this from getting worse if we all work together, and I exercise every day, and, you guys help me, and we don't, because every parent wants an excuse to bribe their children into being more well-behaved. So I was like, all right.
Don't stress me out.
No, don't stress me out. And it was a difficult conversation to have. They both cried because, Josie, especially the little one, she's like, what's Alzheimer's? And I said, well, it's forgetting. I told her it's a forgetting disease. And Celeste kind of had an idea of what it was about. And then the other 2 girls, I had a separate conversation with them because I have a pretty restrictive diet and I have to take a whole pharmacy of supplements, and so it's changed all of our lives quite a bit. But they know with this project that I am creating a book and a story that is starring them and me, and it's going to be talking about dying, and it's about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Now, they're exposed a lot to Tibetan Buddhist stuff from myself and my partner. We just talked to them about it. When the littlest one heard it was about death, she burst into tears and ran out of the room. It's a very scary conversation. And I will admit, I am scared to go through this journey with them. It's not anything any parent wants to have to talk to their kids about. My hope is that, and my partner Robert and I will be writing the story together, as he's also been a long time practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism and is very wise in those ways. And together we are hoping that we can write this story so there will be room for sadness of that experience, but at the same time it will leave a stronger sense of hope. Yes. And the hope comes from, and it's a very abstract, excuse me, it's a very abstract concept for kids, and I think for most adults too, is that if we can recognize that we are all waves in the same ocean, and they rise and they fall, then there's nothing to be afraid of, because the ocean doesn't go anywhere. Now, it's easy to miss a wave. It's easy to miss a wave. And I remember growing up as a little girl, I was very close to my grandfather, and I had this really intense fear of his death. I'd had nightmares about it, of the death of my grandfather. Well, he passed away when I was 24 years old. And interestingly enough, it was not this traumatic, devastating experience that I thought it would be. It was beautiful, and I missed him, but there was this beauty and this grace that came through from the experience. And my own father died 2 years ago, about 2.5 years ago, Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease is more body. It didn't affect his mind as much. But to watch him go through that was very difficult. But his death experience, the few days leading up right before his death, was amazingly beautiful. Wow. And it was this lovely sharing of all of us together of love, and sending him off in this beautiful state of love. And that was another experience where I said, it's interesting that we wait until the final moment to embrace these experiences in life. Yes. When there's so much opportunity to do this all the time. So that's another blessing that this diagnosis has actually been for me. I look at it this way. I may have 15, 20 years to die. And we never know. I could go out and get hit by a bus, tomorrow, I don't know. Or they said there's this new Alzheimer's vaccine they're testing right now. Maybe I live another 50 years. I don't know. None of us do. Yes. To live in those moments as if maybe we say goodbye to everything tomorrow that we know, or everyone that we love. There's a profound sense of beauty and gratitude that comes into life. And for that reason, I appreciate so much that Buddhist approach of living as if you're going to die in every moment, because you'll miss nothing. You will take nothing for granted then.
Yes. So after receiving the diagnosis, I would love to know, I'm so interested in that process that you went through leading up to this choice point and the decision to turn it into something, to turn it into an opportunity, to teach what it seems like was already very alive for you, and the seeds had been sown through your own spiritual practice. So what was that process like of coming to that decision, and to see it that way?
It's really interesting, and I'm gonna backtrack a little more, even just before I received the diagnosis, because I feel like this has all been part of that thread, like you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually been, I think, starting maybe 2.5 years ago, little more than that, grief process that I began. And it came from recognizing what's going on with climate change,
Yes.
actually, which is pretty dire. And I'm not going to get into the science or anything along those lines, but for me, from what I was learning, rediving into scientific papers and, things along, not just reading newspapers, but like actually diving into the science to check how things were going, is that there's a really good chance that everything is going to go very south quickly,
Yes.
within our lifetimes, maybe even before our children reach adulthood. It could go many ways.
Yes.
And that's extremely frightening. And as a parent, I think this is the beauty of what being a parent is, we focus so much on ourselves, and then we give birth to these beautiful, amazing little creatures, and everything becomes about them, So I was frightened for my children and grieving their future in many ways.
Yes.
And that was very difficult. And I think that was when I began to really look at the idea of death, and looking at this idea, or not began. I started revisiting it with a little more seriousness.
Mm-hmm.
Say that. And the idea of impermanence, and what do we hold on to into the now? And how do I parent my children through this situation? Because my kids know, we talk about pollution and animals and fracking, and
Yes.
the air quality where we live has gotten horrible recently. And it's been terrible. And they've developed asthma, and, and so it's been a tricky conversation in terms of, what do I talk to them about future? How do I talk to them about life and death? And, and they're going to watch a lot of deaths in their life, through animal extinction or even a way of life. So Robert and I started having this conversation then a couple years ago, like, how do we talk to our kids about this? How do we present the impermanence of things and prepare them to face an extremely questionable future?
Yes.
That we all took for granted. Things are very different for their future. How do we talk about that? So that was when that conversation really began.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and it probably contributed to the stress that led me to get this diagnosis, but it's all part of the same picture, right?
Yes.
So, I began, I was working with a doctor, and we were trying to figure this out, and realize, like, well, something's going on with my liver, all of that. And then when the genetic test came back and we put the pieces together, it's like, oh no, this is the process that's begun. And he was very graceful in his presentation of the diagnosis. There was a wonderful book that is called The End of Alzheimer's that lists out that he's given to me, which has become my Bible, which is fantastic. But it lists out the statistics of when you have this genetic anomaly and, how it shows up. I remember he just kind of highlighted the section and slid it across the table to me to read. And he said, I want you to read this. And indicated that, yeah, this is the beginning of cognitive decline for you, and which made sense with everything that I was experiencing. And I remember, and I think this is, if you look at what has been in psychology identified as the 5 stages of grief, I went through that. So when he first told me that, my first response was like, all right, well, I've got this. And there was this extreme sense of denial. It took me a couple of weeks to even really own, that was what it was.
Yes.
Like, I knew it on a cognitive level, but there's a disbelief that comes in.
Yes.
And I think even when, like, if somebody dies in your life, it's so hard to believe they're gone, like, we get in the habit of having people and things around.
Yes.
And I had been in the habit of perfect health.
Yes.
I'm 39 years old, I wasn't thinking of anything like that. So I had been in the habit of fineness. Everything was fine.
Yes.
I think to break through, there was that sense of denial. And then there was this really profound sense of sadness and grief that came in, because what I lost was my vision of the future. And I lost this, I've suddenly been thrust into a further realm of unknowing. And it's interesting because we always live in this realm of unknowing. But when you receive something like a medical diagnosis that statistically skews against you, your favor of having like the future, the happiness and the house and the grandkids and all of that, I can't count on that anymore. Maybe now, and this accepting the fact that maybe now my children are going to have to watch me die at a very young age. This is a very, very real possibility. So there was that profound sense of grief that came through for a couple of weeks, and I had to digest that. And then, similar to what was happening a couple years ago around climate change, my perspective shifted to my children once more. Because again, I always put them first. And this thought of, how am I going to prepare them for this? How am I going to prepare everybody I love for this?
Yes.
My partner, even my parents might outlive me. I don't know. I really don't know. Even my sisters, when I started this project, and I told my sisters about this diagnosis long before I began this, and it was like blank slates. I got nothing back. And they were in that denial phase. Yes. Very strongly. And when I launched the crowdfunder for this campaign, and my oldest sister is 6 years older than me, saw the video, she called me up very upset. And, she was like, well, it's just a diet. It doesn't mean that you have, it doesn't, just this continuous
of the denial.
Mom is getting forgetful, and, and, it could just be that, and you don't really know. And it had to be, I had to be like, well, this is the reality of it. And it's very uncomfortable to accept that, because we're all looking at our own mortality in our face. Yes. So that was the process. And really then coming to this point of, okay, I need to look at this mortality. I need to recognize it. And from the conversations that I had before with Robert about how do I talk to these kids, we'd even joked and said, let's make a children's book about the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and that idea had come up a long time ago. Yes. Just as like a conversation, not anything that we even really acted on. Yes. And then I said, well, okay, well now, all right, this is what needs to happen now. Yes. Because I don't know how many good years I have. Yes. I don't know how long I'm going to be able to express this to my family, to my children. And I don't know how long it will take them to understand it. Some people can experience a spiritual enlightenment or spiritual understanding at a very young age. They come in with it. Other people, it's the moment they die. Yes. Suddenly they wake up. Others, maybe it's happy in between. We don't know. So for me, it's funny. I'm giving my children a lesson on impermanence and trying to do it with something as permanent as I can.
Something that will last. Yes.
Something that will last, which is through art, which they know and love. They see me create and paint, and they're thrilled to be a part of this and to watch their faces come up on the canvas and, hear this story unfolding. So that's where this all came from.
Amazing. And yes, was there more? Looked like
no, that was it.
So for everyone who's watching or listening, you can find Kyra's, what is it? Is it Indiegogo campaign? The crowdfunding campaign, Indiegogo campaign, where you can actually help make this book possible. This compilation of paintings and a story about death based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, based on Kyra's experience that she's living right now. And you can find it at, can you give us the link? Or
yeah, it's indiegogo.com / the journey of the in-between, and there's a hyphen between each one. So the project name is The Journey of the In-Between, or you can just go to the indiegogo.com page and look under the art category.
Yes.
And it's under art, and again, the title is The Journey of the In-Between.
The Journey of the In-Between. So Kyra, we are going to wrap up here in a few minutes, but I just wanted to ask you, if you just sort of imagine, your greatest hope for this project, or the essence of what you're trying to get across or hoping to get across. And I know, as you mentioned toward the beginning, that the intention for this is that it will be, displayed in hospitals and hospices, anywhere that will really welcome the project, which I think is, I hope for as much exposure as possible. I hope that, schools welcome it, because this is a part of education that I wish was more embedded. It's a little bit, I think, could be improved, that we wait until, we wait so long before we actually broach the subject of death and impermanence in our culture. But what would be your hope, just in a nutshell, that this can really bring across?
I'm hoping it can. I think in our culture we have a underlying vision of death that's based on a very Christian perspective, which makes sense, given the background of our culture. And I don't think that aspect necessarily needs to change. But what I would like to see is that there is a healthier approach to mentally how we can prepare for it, and mentally how we can work with family members or ourselves if we are going through dying or death, which we all are. I mean, I hate to break it to y'all, but nobody gets out of life alive. So it's a pretty universal message. And I think that what we miss in our general cultural story around death is the psychological aspect, the healthy psychological aspect. The general story we have is we love somebody, or we ourselves die, and we go to heaven, or we go to hell, or whatever, or we go to some place, and then, based on your religious beliefs, and then that's it. There's never a conversation about the state of mind that goes along with it. And I think that there's this beautiful nugget of truth that we're all missing that happens there. And I think that the gift that I've had of helping so many people die over the years has really informed me in this way, in the sense that one thing that I noticed with clients that I worked with, and I was usually working with clients for a long period of time, so I got to know them quite well. Those people that mentally had kept themselves in a state of openness for most of their life, open to change, open to learning experiences, trying to stay positive in some sense.
Yes.
Almost always, the exception being of what was happening in their body, in their mental state, they had a peaceful death. It was an easy transition.
Yes.
It was graceful in a lot of ways. It was easier for their family members. Those people that I met who had a more traumatic life or a very negative view could not handle change well. There's quite a lot of people that could not handle change well, could not face the inevitability of their own death until it was right at the door. And then there was a sense of victimhood from a lot of people. Why is this happening to me? Well, it's going to happen to everybody. We all die, There was no mental preparation that it happened. And their families would see that, and they would suffer for it. And it became this extreme chain reaction. And they often had very turbulent, painful deaths, whether it was body or mentally and emotionally. And there's a definite death process that people go through where the mind starts to go inward. And you can go to a hospice center and they'll even give you a book about it. Like, there's a process of that happening. And you can see, similarly to just how people have lived their lives is so how they exited. So I think it's something extremely important to have a conversation about, in the sense that not to just prepare ourselves to die, but prepare ourselves to have a better life and truly live while we're living. So then when something like death comes, it can be beautiful. And like my father's death was beautiful. My grandfather's death, even though he had dementia also, brilliant man. He very much went out in the way that he lived, which was filled with compassion and empathy and wisdom. And so it's, we reap what we sow, and so it's something important to pay attention to. And that's what my vision is that we can have a different conversation, not necessarily change the conversation, because everybody has beliefs about what happens in our afterlife. And so do the Buddhists. And this will be expressed in this project that I'm doing, in a sense. But the most important aspect that it's focusing on is mind, is that when we go through death, it is a mind experience. Because when you leave your body, that's not it. And everybody knows that in every tradition.
Yes.
You know, so what is it? It's the mind.
Yes.
You know, is the mind. And what have you created in your mind? What have you prepared yourself for? Are you open to experiencing the brilliance of uninhibited nature? Because when we're crammed into these little bodies, you know, we identify with these bodies and we're limited by that. When we're free from it, then it's this brilliant explosion of wisdom and clarity and omnipotence in some way, and omniscience. And, you know, and what the Buddhists have recognized is that more often than not, people get terrified by that.
Yeah.
Because they have identified so strongly with emotional experiences in life.
Yes.
There's an opportunity to be free of that and rest in that place of all potential. So
wow. Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyra.
Oh, thank you.
And, you know, I really feel that your choice, that you've taken the power and the meaningfulness of a diagnosis such as this, and you're putting all of that you are channeling all of that into art and into something that will be nourishment for our culture, nourishment for our children, nourishment for all of us, our whole global family, as we traverse these journeys that are marked by uncertainty being the most certain thing.
Yeah.
I find that to be a phenomenally courageous decision and choice. And I really just have so much reverence and so much honoring and admiration for what you are doing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. And we are going to tell our folks once again where to find you and how they can fund your Indiegogo campaign. Let's do that. Actually, let's do that again. And then I have one final question for you. So it's Indiegogo.com.
Yes. And then
//
the journey of the in between, lots of dash. Or you could just go to Indiegogo.com under their explore search category, look under art, the art category, and the project is The Journey of the In-Between.
The Journey of the In-Between.
Yeah. And sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that this crowdfunding campaign ends on Thanksgiving.
It ends on Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is not, we're not asking for donations. Everyone who contributes, you can receive a signed copy of the book. You can receive prints or originals of art, either from the book or from my current art series. I do art that is based on feminine power and awakening. And I have several paintings that are already available to do. I'll hold one up right now. Like this is one of my paintings. You can see it.
Yes, beautiful.
Hard to see the whole thing.
It's hard to see the whole thing. We can see a lot of it.
Yeah, there's a lot. So, and even these make great, if you would like to get a print of the art or a book or both, the prints from this series, you can get them before Christmas. So they make great Christmas gifts if you're trying to get gifts for people. So it's not a donation. It's a contribution. It's a patronage and investment in a project of which you become a part of. So I do appreciate any and all contributions. We are 72% funded with our $15,000 goal and need to reach the goal by Thanksgiving. And then we can all be grateful.
Well, I hope we can all contribute and meet that goal. If we all do this, let's just jump on it. And before Thanksgiving, if we can make this a reality, let's band together and support each other in these ways to create really our meaning or our calling, our gift, so that you can give your gift and we can all support each other to do that. Kyra, the last question that I ask all my guests is, in just, in just an essential way, just the essence, what wisdom would you share with our listeners about how we can stay uplifted, inspired, and engaged in these times?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the best way, and this is how I do it when I feel stressed or frustrated or down with the world, which is really easy to do in this day and age.
Yeah.
We're inundated with so much information, and there's so much bad news out there right now. I think that it's the best thing to do first is unplug for a moment and stop listening to those stories, and then recognize that we are truly the authors of our own lives. We have the power to take a story that we hear or one that we think and say this is real, make it real, and manifest it. We also have the power to say, no, this is not the story that I'm choosing to live out. This is not the story that I'm going to believe in, and really truly focus our attention on what we do want, what we do believe. For me, it's looking at the innocence and the beauty of my children, or the perfection of nature as everything in perfect balance, and really focus on that. And then I can trust.
Yes.
And we trust and we hold those places. That is really what I would say is own your power, recognize that we can create the world that we want. And that's not to say that bad things won't happen. They will, but it's up to us, the power that we give them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, Katja.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your wisdom. And is there a website or somewhere where folks can also find your art?
Yeah, actually, you can go to kyracoatesart.com, and it's KyraCoatesArt.com. And that is, you can find my art website there. There's also a link there to the Indiegogo campaign. So if you can't find it on there, you can go to the website and click on the button. It'll take you right to it too. So
Brilliant. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And I wish you all the blessings on your journey. May everything that you are envisioning and dreaming from your heart be real.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you again, Kyra Coates. I hope that you're as inspired as I am by this incredible story of how we can turn even the most difficult challenges into something beautiful that will nourish ourselves, our communities, and our world. If you enjoyed this episode, we always record a more in-depth personal session after the general session that you can find. It's available to patrons only on patreon.com. Now, if you don't know about patreon.com, this is a platform that is making the new creative economy possible. What does that mean? It means that artists and creators of all kinds can create a membership on patreon.com and release their work on this platform and be supported by their community. So any one of us can support our favorite artists by contributing a certain amount, a fixed amount that you decide. It can be as little as $1. And that amount is fixed either per month or per creation that artist releases. So it's an incredible way to support artists in living their calling as well as making a livelihood. So if you feel interested, intrigued to see what we're all about on Patreon, please join us on patreon.com/Katya_coach. That's patreon.com/Katya_coach. We love and appreciate the heck out of every single one of our patrons, because you are the ones that make it possible for us to do this work. And not just us, but every creator out there who has their shingle hung up on Patreon. So please, please check us out there. This isn't just a donation. You, as a patron, will receive thank you gifts based on the tier that you support at. And these thank you gifts they include the exclusive version of this podcast. They include journals that are hand designed by myself and the artist Katya Franz Garrison. I was looking around to see if I have any here, but I actually just am shipping them out to some patrons now, and more, even free sessions with me, astrology sessions. So please check us out on patreon.com. And if you like this episode and you'd like to be informed of future episodes, then hop on over to iTunes, click subscribe, and we'll keep you in the loop. You'll be informed every time a new episode of Lift comes out. While you're there, if you don't mind taking a few seconds to leave a rating or a few more moments to leave a review, we would be so grateful. These ratings and reviews make Lift more visible and mean more people like you can actually find this podcast. So thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, stay positive. Take a good dose of self-care. And keep your head up. Remember that together we can lift our collective vibration up a little bit higher. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.